All right, everyone. Hello to all of you. This is Unfound Live, not for January 20th, but for January 21st. This is a very, very, very rare Tuesday episode of the live show. Now, if you've been around long enough, you know that going way back to the beginning, some of you might remember that the live show originally was on Tuesdays. And then it got moved to Wednesdays, where it was for a long time. And then, of course, then it got moved to Mondays, and it's been on Monday for at least a couple years now. But way back in the day, the original first live shows that happened late 2017, somewhere in there, that was when I was just doing it on Facebook. The show was on Tuesdays, and I forget why. I think I moved it to Wednesdays because at that point we were going to trivia on Tuesdays or something. And then I moved it back to Mondays for some reason. And of course, now trivia is on Wednesdays. It's just always hips, trying to balance all these things that I do in my life. Is sometimes it's like a little bit like hopscotch. But here we are. This is January 21st and of 2025. I have a spectacular show lined up for all of you tonight. I don't know that it's one of those things, given though that it's on a Tuesday, I don't know how many people are going to remember that the show is tonight. And in fact, I have to believe there were at least a few people who might have been expecting the show last night. And of course, it didn't happen. So there's that. But I decided to move it to tonight. Last night because of the National College Football Championship. I wanted to watch it. I know a lot of you wanted to watch it. Of course, Ohio State and Notre Dame have huge fan bases. And I had to believe that some of you were going to do that. So I thought, why not? And I moved it to tonight. So here we are, Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. As I stated, I have a spectacular show lined up for you. I'm going to talk finally about a little more about my appearance, at least part one of my appearance on the Silver Linings Playbook podcast hosted by Jason Blair. Part one came out today. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the Steve Pankey letters that are off to my left here. Of course, there's a lot of it that I can't mention because I'm still working on it. But I had several letters to look at once I got back from Pennsylvania, and I finally made time to do that over the past week. Would have liked to have done it sooner, but as all of you know, I've been fighting some issues for a little while now, so I'm not as efficient as I usually am. And also, I want to look at this story regarding some fake firefighters. They're down in LA. Found that story that is both sad and kind of certainly unusual, maybe at least a little bit funny, not a lot funny, but like darkly humorous. That caught my eye. And there's some other stuff that I want to get to that I did not have room to put it in these items in the title tonight. So there you go. Please give this video a thumbs up as you are watching tonight. If you are new, maybe you're somebody new who's tuning in on the very, very rare Tuesday show. Congratulations to you, by the way. please consider subscribing to the channel. Even though the podcast that comes out on Fridays has been on hiatus, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. But I do plan to upload some new videos. In fact, I did one last week, a little bit of a map for the re-release of the Ben Padilla episode last Friday. I never did do a map video on that disappearance, so I made a map video, posted it there, here, or there, or here, wherever you may be on the YouTube channel. And given what this Friday's episode will be, once again, a revisitation on hiatus episode that coincidentally, the disappearance took place right down the street from me, but it occurred before I moved to Florida. I am going to go down there and do a little video down at that location, actually a couple locations. Maybe couldn't have done it today because it was just an ugly day here, raining and everything. So maybe it'll be a little nicer tomorrow, or maybe it'll be a little nicer on Thursday, that I can drive down there and get in some videos. So that will be posted to the YouTube channel as well for a disappearance that occurred right down the street in an area we call Indian Rocks Beach. So there you go. Once again, please consider subscribing. If you're on Facebook, like and share the Facebook page. If you are not yet in the discussion group on Facebook, please request to be let in. Maybe there are some people who are finding out for the first time about the podcast due to my appearance on the Silver Linings Playbook podcast. Maybe some of you are tuned in here tonight. So there are a variety of places if you want to go check out what we do here. Facebook, Instagram, and the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. I can talk a little bit more about I'm going to talk a little bit more about the website here in a bit as well, considering something that was done today. So there you go. And what else is going on? Of course, I have to make a point to talk a little bit more about my sleep. Even though maybe a lot of you are like, oh no, Ed's going to talk about his sleep again. I have discovered that some of you, contacted me after the live show plays, even like, for example, last Monday. I did have a couple people contact me after the live show to talk about my sleep issues. They want to talk about their sleep issues and the way I'm trying to take care of it. And if I can be, me talking about my own issues, and I don't mind putting them out there. Some people do. I really don't mind it. If it becomes like a public service announcement regarding people who suddenly can't sleep, they have insomnia, or, you could have sleep problems for other reasons. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight up insomnia, maybe from pain or some stress or whatever else. I'm more than happy to spread the word about what I've been doing and how it is something that is scientifically based, and it's not some mumbo jumbo or anything. And I think that it is very slowly helping me. So if I can spread the word and it can help other people who are in the same kind of situation that I am in, then I am going to do that. This live show, as all of you know, or at least some of you know, most of you know, although we do true crime here, we get into other topics. I get into other topics at least once in a while. We've talked about movies and music and current events and all sorts of things on this live show, even though I do bring a lot of true crime news to the show every time we go live here. But the sleep pattern I'm on now, my sleep therapist has seen fit to give me 15 more minutes of sleep at night. But this just happened yesterday. And so when you saw me last Monday, I was going to bed at 1:30 and getting up at 7 very strictly. Now my to bed time has been moved back to 1:15. And still it's the same wake time of 7:00. And in fact, the getting up time will always stay the same through all of this. It's always going to be 7 a.m. And any expansion that she sees fit to give me, happens at the going to bed part of it and not the getting up part of it. And the way this also works is it's only in 15-minute increments per week. If, once again, things are going in the right direction. And if they aren't, you have to stick with whatever you're doing. So right now, working that out, I'm scheduled to get 5 hours and 45 minutes of in-bed time, I guess you could say. Now, how much sleep do I get in that is really up to me. Is that the way it works out? Yeah. And so it's not a lot of time. Is that the way it is? No, 5 hours. Not 5 hours. Yeah, 5 hours and 45 minutes. So let me think this out. Yeah, that's what it is. A total of 5 hours and 45 minutes. Now, the problem was this morning, my body got me up at like 6:15. So you're looking at me, and I got maybe 5 hours of sleep last night. Now, it was good sleep, but certainly not enough sleep. And what I call it is filet mignon sleep. It tastes great, but there's not enough of it. And I really want to get to a point where I'm more like New York strip steak sleep, where it maybe doesn't taste as good as filet mignon, but there's a lot more of it. And I'm working toward that. But there's a plan, and you have to follow this plan. And you can't just jump into things or it won't work. It's a very, very structured system, and it's very difficult, as I've mentioned more than once since this all started on this live show. It's very difficult. No naps are allowed or anything like that during the day. So it's something. It is really something. I know I said that last week. I said it this week. I'm probably going to say it next week. And what this means, though, really, is that I can tell you right now that I'm not going to get back to doing regular episodes of the podcast until I'm to a point where I'm getting regular sleep again. Because I have to tell you that given all of the recording and writing and everything else that I have to do for the episodes, of course, now for the last 8 years, it would be, of course, tracking people down and interviewing them and writing outlines and everything else. It would be very, very difficult to do that consistently right now. I am getting work done, but it is work that really does not have a deadline. I'm slowly working toward it. If I just want to do a little bit of it per day, I can do that. Of course, with the podcast, if you're going to get back into it, it has to come out every Friday. And I just, once again, cannot guarantee that I'm going to be able to get all the work done that I need to every day, because there are certain times of the day where, my head's in a little bit of a fog because, once again, I'm restricting my sleep, but I don't want anybody to think, well, that sounds dangerous and everything else. It's all part of the plan to get my sleep back to a situation that is good. So there you go. Let's see who is in here before I continue. Hello, Karen. She was in early. Hello, Sarah. You were in early too. Then Amy and Neighborly and Mary Jane and Amy and CR. Yeah, hello to all of you. Good to see all of you. Amy said, my notification reminded me. Well, thank you for having the bell on, Amy. Thank you for doing that. So, it's, as you would probably expect, when it comes to making the podcast, I have to concentrate for long, long periods of time, which has in my life has been one of my really, really strong suits. Being able to work on something for hours at a time. Not able to do that as easily right now. Can certainly go out and go to trivia, and I went down to see my buddy Dave yesterday and some things, but there are times during the day where really I'm just miserable. It's really just a miserable situation. But the fact is, being that I'm charting my sleep is getting better. It's becoming deeper. It's becoming more solidified, although there's not enough of it right at this point. I think that I am on schedule for getting this all in some semblance of something I can be happy with. Let's say within the next month, to 6 weeks or something like that. And that's pretty standard. That's I'd like for it to happen more quickly, but people, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and reading a lot of people's experiences with it. Usually takes about 6 weeks if you're following it, being very disciplined, to getting back to the way people used to feel before, they started having sleep problems. But I'm in that phase right now where you're miserable. And that's going to continue for a while. So, even as I was telling my buddy Dave, who's known me for over 30 years, I was even telling him that, it's not easy for me to be around people who know me well, because I know that I'm not me. I'm working a little, at a little bit of a deficit here. And so when I'm out, even though, like I said, I'm going to trivia, I went to the car show with my brother and other things. I would not say right at this point that I totally 100% feel like myself. The good news, the funny thing is, the interview that I did, that the part 1 came out today, in listening to part 1, you will never know. Of course, I'm going to tell you, but I don't, if you can fully understand it, how tired I was during that interview. If you're going to listen to the Silver Linings Playbook interview that I did, part 1 came out today. Is part 2 coming out on Friday? Maybe it is, or maybe next Tuesday. But that was done on November 29th, right after this started. That was like a very, very, one of the worst weeks of my life. And the end of that week was me doing that interview with Jason Blair. And I was so miserable. I was so tired. Really, the way I remember now, I could barely think straight. And that part 1 sounded as good as it did. I was a little amazed. It's like, man, I almost sound like my regular self there. I can tell that I'm not. Maybe none of you can. But in listening to it, I was like, man, I sound good. I can tell that there was something going on with me, but I really sound in the interview pretty good. And I got my points across, and we'll see how part 2 is when it comes out. I've not heard it yet, but I was a little worried about that. And I listened to part 1. I was like, well, I guess it's not so bad. But I don't know if I'll be able to communicate to all of you how miserable I was feeling during that. Not Jason's fault, of course, my fault, because of everything that had gone on the previous 5 days. And, what's crazy is that when I did that interview, and that interview was done on November 29th, 28th, 29th, somewhere in there, 25th, 26th. Must have been the 29th November. So the day after Thanksgiving, I think. at that point, I thought if that was going to continue, I have no idea how I'm going to make it into December, into January, if I'm going to continue to have sleep issues. But here I am 2 months later. Things aren't 100%, but here I am, and I am getting some good work done, even though it's not podcast work. I am getting some really good Unfound work done that is eventually you're all going to get to check it out eventually. So, I really did not know where everything was going at the end of November. And thinking about January of 2025 seemed like so far away. But here I am 2 months later, and having driven to Pennsylvania and hung out with my dad for a couple weeks, driven back and everything else. So life continues to move on. So that is the status of my sleep situation. And once again, if you're just finding out about this for the first time, because of some sleep issues I had back in November that were brought on for probably a variety of reasons, I'm doing something called cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia, CBT-I. And I am in what they call the sleep restriction phase. And it is exactly as it sounds, where you are on a plan. You are only allowed to sleep so many hours per night. And this is scientifically proven over time to get your circadian rhythm and everything back into sync, even though it takes some time. It's a conditioning. It is kind of like Pavlov's dogs type of situation. And it just takes some time to become ingrained in people once they get out of bad, once they get away from their bad sleep habits. And you should know, bad sleep habits are very, very difficult to get back into line. It's kind of like maybe not as difficult, but along the lines of like trying to quit smoking or something like that. And that's why this sleep restriction therapy is somewhat radical, but it works. But it's no fun. You think about like Navy SEALs, they do sleep deprivation. Know anything about the training of like special forces around the world. And one of those, it's not just the physical, the running and everything, swimming and everything else. Incorporated into that is also sleep deprivation. If you don't know, this is kind of like that. So there you go. All right, moving on. Some other things. My trivia team, speaking of trivia from a few minutes ago, trivia team won this past Wednesday. There was a 5-way tie for first place, and we won the tiebreaker. So we are into the new season of trivia, and here we are right back at the top of the heap. So that's nice. All right, now that anything else personal going on, like I said, I went down. My buddy Dave, who I just seen when I was up in Pennsylvania, he lives in Illinois, but his parents still live in Western Pennsylvania. I just saw him a few weeks ago when I was up there in December around Christmas. Well, he came down here to see a friend of his who lives in Bradenton. So I drove down there and we got together for lunch yesterday. And we had a great time. However, I will tell you, driving back, man, I was worn out. Barely, driving and is no fun certain times of the day with what I have going on. And I'm not allowed to take any naps. So once I got home yesterday, no naps allowed. So you have to find a way to stay up. But I went down, we had a great time, had some great seafood. We had these these huge tacos, and was it grouper tacos or something? They were spectacular, and so we just sat there and BS'd for a little bit. Dave and I went to college together, Grove City College. Both of us graduated in 1993. I've known him all that time. So that did that. Otherwise, trivia and that. Otherwise, not had much of a social life. All right, let's get into the true crime part of the show tonight for the next hour and a half. And like I said, I have quite a bit to talk about, so let's get started. First of all, of course, this past Friday's episode. I didn't put out a poll or anything in the group, but we did do a think tank on Ben's disappearance on Sunday evening. We're still doing that over at patreon.com, as you can see across the bottom of the screen. Patreon.com/Unfound podcast. And the consensus among the think tank members is that, yes, this was some actual kind of theft. That Ben was involved in with these other guys, and they schemed to steal this Boeing 727 for purposes of taking it somewhere, and that it was going to be used for something. And of course, we can't deny the jet did take off. I mean, it's not like it was like beamed somewhere like in Star Trek. It was on the tarmac. They got in the plane, shut the door, the engines fired up, and went out onto the runway and took off and went somewhere. It's somewhere on the earth. Nobody denies that. My issue, though, the way I look at it is, and this is one of those things where I think that you have to have a pretty good understanding of navigation and how jets fly from point A to point B and all of that, which of course I have that knowledge because of my longtime interest in plane crashes. And a lot of plane crashes are caused by navigation errors. Very common. And for me, I have a hard time believing that those guys could have flown anywhere with any type of navigation and not be seen. You have to remember, they would not have the benefit of, air traffic control. They would not have the benefit of putting in waypoints or anything like that, because who knows if that jet even had that in its computer. They basically, if they wanted to get anywhere, they would have been flying like it was the 1950s. We're just using a compass and saying, all right, that's due north and we want to go this direction. And so we're going to, did they work out? How were they going to land? Where were they going to land? Was this airport going to have landing lights? Or, you start thinking about all of this and it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. I mean, there's a reason that this is one of the, maybe one of the only times that a jet of this size has ever been stolen. In contrast to Flight 370, which was a real flight. We have to remember, Flight 370, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was a real flight with real pilots and passengers and flight attendants. And it was flying from Malaysia to China. It was a real flight. And so it had all the advantages of, as it's been talked about over and over and over, with pings and computers, talking to satellites. And of course, it's still missing. The flight that Ben would have had in the 727 wouldn't have had any of that. Zero. I realize it was 20 some years ago, but still, that stuff existed back then. But they would not have had the advantage of using any of that. And so then we're supposed to figure out, well, then how did they get from point A, which would have been the country of Angola, to point B, wherever it was, whether they were flying east across Africa or north into Africa, like going up toward Algeria, that area, Tunisia, or going south towards the country of South Africa. I mean, what are we talking about here? I just don't think they could have done that. And I'm convinced that was maybe their plan, but we also have to remember it was late in the day, night was coming, and then I start thinking about spatial disorientation, because I don't really, Ben certainly wasn't qualified to fly the plane. Maybe one of those other guys were, but they would have been doing it without all of the benefits that pilots get. And it'd be very easy to become disoriented at night. with no horizon and everything, and it easily could have crashed somewhere or just crashed into the ocean or landed. It doesn't matter. So I'm convinced it could have been part of some theft. I don't think it was some sort of joyride, but maybe it was. But I don't think if there was a destination in mind, I don't think it got to the destination. I think that it either crashed shortly after takeoff in the water or shortly after takeoff on land somewhere and just hasn't been found yet. And we have to keep in mind, yes, a Boeing 727 is a jet airliner that could hold 130 people, 140 people or something. So it's not small. But when you compare it to the size of Africa, it's pretty small. And so I guess it's at least conceivable that it could crash somewhere and nobody would come across it. It's certainly conceivable. So there you go. Certainly rare, one-of-a-kind disappearance. But I have to admit that this is one of those disappearances, although I don't like to talk too publicly about this type of stuff. I don't have a lot of hopes that Ben Padilla's disappearance is going to be solved. I know there are people out there, of course, Tim Wright and I even talked about that. Was Ben seen somewhere? Was the guy who's with him seen somewhere? Did Ben go somewhere and lead a new life and everything? I suppose it's conceivable, but I don't know, it just sounds a little fantastical to me. So Ben Charles Padilla, and we have to also remember there's a reason that this disappearance is so unique, that passenger jets just don't get stolen. So there's that. Hello, Kathy. Thanks for tuning in tonight, Kathy. And I see you, Dee Dee. Maybe some people are just realizing, oh yeah, the live show got moved to Tuesday night. Maybe some of you are just realizing that now. And of course, if people miss it, they can catch it as a podcast when it comes out on Spotify and iTunes tomorrow. Moving on, I want to go back and I at least want to talk a little bit about part one of my appearance on the Silver Linings Playbook podcast hosted by Jason Blair. It came out today. It's in all the, of course, popular podcast locations. I've posted the link in the discussion group on Facebook on the page. You can also find the link on the website, theunfoundpodcast.com. I'm thinking most of you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify or something like that. You can, of course, find it on there as well. And it's just audio. There was no video. So far, part one has been played. As I stated earlier, I was a little worried about how I was going to sound because I was feeling as miserable can be. But I didn't want to back out of my interview with Jason. That had been something that had been planned since October. And I'm not the kind of guy to back out of things like that, especially I know how I feel when I schedule people to be interviewed and then they back out for some reason. And that happens more than any of you will ever know. And so I didn't want to become one of those people, even though I did have some things going on. But we got it done. Part one came out today. It's a long the whole thing. So this is part one. I think we went for like 2.5 hours. And I think what came out today was like an hour or something like that. So there's a long way to go, I guess is what I'm saying. You just got a little, maybe a 35 to 40% taste of it today. And really, if you haven't listened to it yet, mainly as you would expect in an interview like this, really first was talking about my background and, and like I've said in the run up to this being released, it's probably the most complete interview that's ever been done with me in the context of being the host of Unfound. Certainly Julia Cowley at the console did a fantastic job too. But Jason, we hit upon some new things regarding me and my upbringing and other things. So you might find that interesting. And then, of course, we eventually did get talking about disappearances and my insights, my criticism, talked about how I got into podcast. Some of it you've heard before, but I think some of it is going to be new to all of you. And but I have to also admit, I know we went for 2.5 hours back there at the end of November. Given that I was kind of a little foggy at that time anyway, I can't really remember what we talked about in part 2. I think we do get into different types of disappearances, and we talk about some of Unfound's disappearances and everything. But I don't specifically remember because, like I said, my mind that particular night was in a totally different place, and that I was even able to sound sane is a little bit of a small miracle. So please check it out. Jason's doing good work over there. He's had friend of the podcast, Julia Cowley, on his show a few times. I've not listened, to be honest, I've not listened to all of his episodes, but I've listened to the ones where Julia appeared. So I think you should check it out. Maybe, of course, listen to part 1 of my interview first, and then maybe you want to take a look at the other offerings that Jason has. It's mainly true crime based, but he does other things, mixes in some other things in there. But he does talk about disappearances and some other topics that we would put under the general title of true crime. So it's out, and please listen to it. I would love your feedback on it. I would appreciate that. All right, moving on. Where do I want to go next? Let's go to... I'm kind of going to put this all together. This is in the title, The Pankey Letters. Here are the letters that I got from Steve Panky, and they were all dated from December. Now, of course, you remember I was up seeing my dad for a couple weeks, and so I had to wait until I got back from Pennsylvania to even get these letters, and so they were waiting for me. I got back January 2nd or something, but given everything that's been going on, I didn't open these letters until this past week. Now, what's interesting to me, and like I said, given that I still can't talk in depth about the discovery materials that I'm still going through, by the way, that I received, I can't talk about a lot with Steve of what Steve wrote. But, he is thankful that I'm going through the discovery materials. And I have to give it to him that these discovery materials, as you would probably imagine, are creating a lot of new questions in my mind. And just like when I interviewed him, even though we now know that Steve lied in the interview that I did with him way back in 2019, it's hard to believe that's over 5 years ago. That's just crazy. But once again, I'm asking him questions about these discovery materials, things that I'm running across in them, and he's answering them. Now, whether he's being truthful or not, I don't know. Okay. It's going to take some further work. And like I said, I'm hoping eventually that I can reveal all of this to you. But on the other hand, as I stated last week or the week before, I don't know if I'm totally on solid legal ground at this point for revealing anything. So, I'm going to wait until I get a firm answer on that. And like I said in a prior live show, I have spoken to a lawyer about this. And of course, I did not receive this material illegally. I didn't steal it or anything, of course. It was sent to me electronically. But there are some issues regarding should the stuff have been sent to me, especially considering that there is an appeals process that's going on regarding Steve. Steve, of course, appealed his conviction like any guilty person does. And so there's that. And even so, I'm not close to being done reading all the discovery materials yet either. I will tell you this, though, and I can talk about this particular topic without revealing anything specific in it, because once again, reading page after page of these PDF files, a lot goes through your mind. And of course, unless you're really new to me and to the podcast and everything, you know that my stance continues to be that I do not believe that the prosecution proved that Steve killed Jonelle Matthews. He may very well have done it. Now, I will tell you this, and looking at the discovery materials, there's nothing in there. All right, I think I can say that. As I stated from both trials, and I think these discovery materials are reflective of both trials, in that there's no proof, anything, that Steve killed Jonelle. He very well may have. Very well may have. But there's no proof of that. There's not one report that I've seen that even a person of Steve's description was seen on that street, or a car that he drove was seen on that street, or anything else, or even, proving that the shoes, the pattern of the shoes were shoes that Steve wore or anything. Nothing. Zero. None of that is in those materials. None. Zero. But in thinking about all of that, one thing or a couple things continued to come into my mind over and over, and really because they are the centerpieces of Jonelle's abduction and murder. And that is those footprints in the snow. And this came out in the trial. So once again, I don't think it's any big deal for me to talk about this. They never did figure out the brand of shoe that was used to make the pattern that was found in the snow. Now, remember, some of it all got raked over, but there were footprints or shoe prints that were not raked over. And to get really specific on that, the shoe prints that were out in the front yard were not raked. The shoe prints that were in the backyard were raked. And there is a picture within the discovery materials that shows that. And this print, they sent, I don't even know how many different shoe companies they sent letters to. Of course, this is in 1980s terms. They couldn't just email somebody. They actually had to write letters. Not one shoe company could look at that pattern and say, those are our shoes. Not one. Why is that? Well, I don't know. Could these, could there just been some really off-brand? Or could it be that the pattern, given that it was in the snow, did it get distorted? Because a lot of these companies sent photos of the treads of some of their shoes that they thought were close, but none perfectly matched up. None. So Was it that the shoe, of course, they're going to the main manufacturers, but we don't know what this manufacturer, it could have just been some fly-by-night company. These shoes could have been made by, being that it was in 1984, maybe this was a shoe company that went out of business in the 1960s or something. There's a few different possibilities. Could it be that the snow itself distorted the tread in some way that would not allow the tread that's marked in the snow to be matched up to actual shoe? Possible. So a variety of possibilities. But they never matched it up. And you should know that the size of the shoe was a size 11. And yes, in the questions, I did send Steve a letter today. I've never asked him before, but I asked him in this letter, and he better answer me. I asked him, well, what size shoe do you wear, Steve? So we're going to find that out. I don't think that has ever been made public, at least not to my knowledge. So we're going to get it right from Steve, see if he feels like answering that question, because the shoes were size 11. Does Steve wear a size 11? We're going to find out. Of course, he could lie. We'll find that out, which I'll try to figure out as best I can. The issue I have, though, is that I still have a hard time imagining how this abduction occurred. Whether Steve did it, or somebody else did it, or a group of other people did it, whatever, it's still a little hard to visualize what happened. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, you have to understand Jonelle's, of course, we have these footprints around the outside of the house. What don't we have? No footprints from Jonelle. Zero. Now, why is that? Could be a couple different reasons. Was she carried? Did somebody abduct her and carry her away out to a car, presumably? Possible. The issue, though, with that is, even though she was only 12 years old, as it's said over and over and over in these discovery materials, thousands of pages, by the way, that I have to go through, she was not small for her age. And in fact, it's stated more than once, she was developing quick for her age at 12 years old. So I'm not saying she couldn't have been carried, but she wasn't a 5-year-old. And in fact, when it comes to even class, as a 12-year-old, she was big, tall for her age. And carrying her, how do you carry somebody like that, a 12-year-old girl, and keep her quiet and everything? It's, of course, if there's more than one person, I guess you could figure it out. But according to the footprints, there was only one person out there. So how would one person do that? Grab her, carry her, keep her quiet, and whisk her away. It's a little hard to imagine. I'm not saying it's impossible. When we start thinking about it, it does seem a little complicated and high risk and chancy, and seems like it would go wrong. Of course, it didn't. Now, what's also caught my attention, once again, going through these materials, we don't have Jonelle's footprints on the outside of the house anywhere. And in fact, it's not even believed when it comes to like the raking that her footprints were raked over. It's not alleged anywhere in any of the documents that I've seen. Likewise, we don't have any wet footprints inside the house. So, of course, the accepted crime is that Jonelle's home by herself, somebody shows up, creeping around the house on the outside in the snow, and then eventually this person who's making these footprints abducts Jonelle. So did the person knock on the door or something? Jonelle opened it up and immediately got taken. And so this person never had to step foot inside the house, because I can tell you, granted, snow is water, and we can conceivably say, well, if the person did go up to the door and knocked, and she opened the door and figured out, oh, she's getting abducted, and she goes running through the house, and the person's chasing her. Of course, there's no proof of that. There was nothing broken or anything. We have to realize that given the snow and everything, that there would have been footprints inside the house. Even if they were just water, there would have been water stains. It would have been very obvious that somebody was in there. There's not one piece of information that ever said they found any footprints or shoe prints or wet shoe prints, anything like that inside the house. A little hard to understand. Moreover, given that we have the snow on the outside, what does the snow, around the front door, around the back door of the house, those footprints do not show any signs of a struggle. That, with Jonelle's footprints or anything. So this is a point that I've tried to make before, some years ago regarding all this. But now that I have all the information in front of me and I keep reading over this stuff, because even though there's thousands of pages I'm looking at, some of it is duplicates, from a different point of view, a different investigator, whoever, kind of gets ingrained in your head. And you start thinking, well, how exactly did this go down? No Jonelle footprints on the outside of the house. No wet shoe prints or anything inside the house. No signs of violence inside the house. The only thing we have is that jewelry box that was left open that still nobody's been able to explain. We also have to think about, was there a car? Now, you should know it's at least conceivable that there are no footprints for Jonelle, because the garage door is open, and that's something that's gone over and over and over. There's still no explanation as to why the garage door was open when Russ Ross dropped Jonelle off. Even though Jim Matthews, who was the last person to leave the house earlier that day, insists that he shut the garage door. Russ Ross says it was open when he dropped Jonelle off at 8-something. That's never been resolved. There, at least in all the materials I've seen so far, there's no explanation for that. The police, in all the paperwork, have no opinion on that. They don't know what to think of that, which I think, once again, I think this is important. Where I'm going with this is that the garage door is open. Of course, there's a door that goes from the garage where the cars would be parked into the house. So I guess the thinking is that the reason there are no footprints for Jonelle, if she did get abducted and walked, was forced, let's say at gunpoint, must have left through that garage, the door that was in the garage. The little, the door that goes out to where the cars would be parked. Of course, the garage door is open. And then even though there was snow on the grass, there was no snow on the driveway. Now, you should know, I did look this up. When did it snow before Jonelle got abducted? It was a full week before. I looked this up. The last time it snowed in Greeley was December 13th. It snowed a few inches. She was not abducted until December 20th. But it was so cold, it's certainly easy to believe, it is Colorado, that the snow stayed on the ground that whole time. Might have melted a little bit, but still there was snow on the ground. But also we could say that's enough time for snow to maybe melt or something happen, on the gravel or the pavement of the driveway. So the thinking is that is how Jonelle left the house. Out through the garage door, into the driveway, being forced to do so. The problem we have is that there are no footprints from the abductor to show that. There was nothing. in the paperwork showing, all it showed was the footprints going to the front door and to the back door. There was no signs that these wet prints ever stopped at the door that would have been inside the garage that you could have gone right into the house. Nothing like that. Like I said, I know this is all very technical, and maybe if I had a diagram or something, I could do that. In fact, maybe being that I have some time on my hands, I suppose I could do, I could sketch out a diagram and like do this like from above. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll find some time to do that over the next couple of days and post on the YouTube channel so I can better explain this. The big issue is none of this was ever explained in either of the trials. The prosecution totally avoided it. They never described what they thought happened that evening. A step-by-step process as to how Jonelle got abducted. They don't touch it. So this is why this is important to me. I think, to me, this stuff is important. And, if you're going, whether Steve Panky's a weird guy. I don't even like him. But if you're going to send a guy away for the rest of his life, should not have these things been explained? You would think. Should not a jury have expected the prosecution to explain these things? You'd think, but they didn't. Because once again, I realize just in general, somebody went up to the front door and abducted her. Except that's not what the facts show. Except for that. And we have the footprints to show it, to prove it. So this has all been on my mind. And like I said, maybe I need to do a little sketch drawing of all of this and, explain it to you in a way. Because once again, trying to do this this way, just with the audio and without any diagrams is a little difficult. Suffice to say, it's just not clear to me. And I think it should be clear. I think it should be. And was there anything else? I have it in my notes. So I still can't figure out how things went down at the Matthews house. No Jonelle footprints on the outside. No wet shoe prints inside. Jonelle could not have been carried. She was big for her age. And on top of everything else, once again, if I would have been Steve Panky's defense lawyer, I would have made the point. There's no proof that those footprints were ever made when Jonelle was home. That's you're taking that for granted. There is no proof of that. Those footprints could have been made anytime before she got home that evening. And of course, we can't forget that the garage door was open. And so doesn't it make, if we're going to go in the logic direction, if you want to do that, does it not seem more likely, given what I've just gone through in the last 10 minutes, that somebody was creeping around the house before Jonelle got home and opened that garage door, and she happened upon this person when she went inside somehow? To me, given the way it's all explained in the materials that I'm looking at that were used for both trials, or at least the first trial, that seems like a more likely scenario than her coming home and then somebody roaming around outside and peeking in or anything else. Especially since we don't have any footprints or anything inside the house. Did the person maybe take off his shoes before he went inside or something? So this is where I am with all of this. Do I want to say any more regarding this? No, I think I'm just going to leave it at that because I've talked myself into doing a little bit of a diagram, and I'll have to just do it by hand. I'll sketch out because I have to make it big enough that all of you can see it. I'll sketch out a floor plan of the Matthews house, and then I will be able to explain to all of you what I'm talking about. From an aerial view, but the front and the back and the garage and everything, and where the footprints were and which ones got raked over and which ones didn't, and all of that. It's just interesting to me. No signs of Jonelle on the outside of the house. So that's where I am with this. So hello, Lisa. Lisa forgot that the live show was tonight. I'm going to pretend I didn't read that, Lisa. Hello, Marty. Everybody's saying hi to Marty. Marty is very popular. Marty, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the Panky trial. Very plausible. Okay, Marty, thank you. Okay. Let's move on to this. So that's enough Jonelle Matthews and Steve Panky items. But like I said, be looking for a video within the next couple days. I'll have to figure out how I want to do it. But I'm now very motivated to make a video, a map video about that. All right, let's move on down to these fake firefighters. Let's see where that is. If you can believe this, it just doesn't even sound believable, but it is. And it has to also do with an arson suspect that's still on the run. The FBI has rekindled a decades-long manhunt for a serial arson suspect accused of domestic eco-terrorist cell that lit off more than a half dozen fires in the 1990s and early 2000s, shortly after LA authorities announced the arrest of a pair of fake firefighters from Oregon, one of whom has a criminal history of arson. The LA County Sheriff's Department told Fox News Digital Sunday that Dustin Nell, NEHL, and Jennifer Nell, NEHL, were arrested after allegedly impersonating firefighters and driving into a restricted zone in a fake fire truck from a fake department. Those LA people, they're so crazy. Of course, these people were from Oregon, though. The FBI is offering $50,000. Now they're going back to this other arson, this kind of things all combined. Going back to the previous arson suspect from the 1990s. The FBI is offering $50,000 for information leading to the arrest of Josephine Sunshine Overraker, a suspected domestic terrorist accused of setting arson fires to spread an animal rights message alongside a group of fellow radicals. She, too, has been accused of posing as a firefighter. Overacker was indicted 24 years ago, Sunday, on charges including arson, destruction of an energy facility, and domestic terrorism. Her exact age is unknown, but she's believed to have been born between October of 71 and November 74, so she's around my age. The incidents she is alleged to have been involved in were linked to extremist groups known as the Earth Liberation Front, ELF. Maybe many of you have heard of them. And the Animal Liberation Front. The alleged attacks took place in Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, and Wyoming beginning in 1996. Several hours after LA authorities announced the couple's arrest, now back to the present, the FBI's most wanted account on X reposted a flyer seeking information on Overaker, a longtime fugitive. It's not clear that the Nails had any connection to Overaker or the radical group she is accused of working with. The FBI reshared her wanted poster on the 24th anniversary of her federal indictment. But speaking of these two fake firefighters, Dustin Nell has a criminal record that includes prior arson charges, according to authorities who found him dressed up in firefighting gear, carrying radios, and riding with his wife in a decommissioned fire truck that had been purchased at auction. Can you believe this? The vehicle was emblazoned with the name of a fake Oregon agency, the Roaring River Fire Department. Under their firefighting gear, according to authorities, they were wearing Cal Fire t-shirts, California State Firefighting Agency. Dustin Nell served 5 years in prison for a series of vandalizations that culminated in an arson attack at a country club and other locations. Overaker, now they're going back to the prior person. This gets a little confusing, whoever wrote this article. Overaker is the last remaining suspect out of 17 in a catastrophic 1998 fire at the Vail Ski Resort in Colorado. And she has not been captured. In 2018, fellow longtime fugitive Joseph Mahoud Dibby was arrested in Cuba for his role in the plot. He pled guilty in 2022 in exchange for an 87-month prison sentence. All right. So regarding these two people who are the fake firefighters, once again, they had a fire truck. It was a real fire truck that had been decommissioned. So I don't know what happened to it, but some fire department had it out there, probably, I guess, in Oregon, and they sold it. These people somehow got their hands on it. They drive it down to LA, and they're cruising around in the restricted zone, probably looking for places to rob. And I'm sure many of you have seen all of the stories about these people who have fled their homes. And of course, a lot of these places are in really, really nice areas of LA, Pacific Palisades, Malibu, etc. And of course, a lot of these houses did not get burned. These people were ordered to evacuate, and any smart person's going to do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their house is eventually going to get burned down. And so what happens, all these people leave, and they're waiting to come back, and what happens? These people come out of nowhere, and they creep into these neighborhoods, however, and they break into these houses and start ripping these people off. Well, these people went one step further in having this truck going in there. Who would think that? I mean, I guess, we have people out there who are pretending to be cops. I mean, how many stories have we all seen over the years where there are fake cops pulling people over for speeding, and they eventually end up pulling over some off-duty cop, and that's when the crap hits the fan usually. And but they're out there. They have, a car that looks like a police car. Maybe it's a decommissioned police car that they bought at an auction. And maybe they put a flashing light inside of it, and they get the uniform and everything else. And of course, we know that some guys have done this and actually ended up, attacking women, raping women, murdering women by doing these. Women, and, they see the cop pull up behind, they pull to the side of the road, and then this happens. And in fact, we even have stories out there where some of the, some women kind of knew what was going on and fled. They didn't pull over. And good for those women for being very astute, kind of smelling that, something doesn't smell right here. But this takes it to a totally different level when these people are going to go out and get a fire truck. Now, here is my suspicion. I don't know if there's any proof of this. I'm sure they're going to look into it. My guess is that these people did not buy this fire truck just within the last couple of weeks since these fires started. My guess is that these people have probably had this truck for a while and have been using it to rip people off in different areas. And then when they saw what was going down in LA, they thought, oh, wow, this is going to be a target-rich atmosphere. We can drive our truck down there and we can just cruise around these neighborhoods and, make it look good and never be questioned. Because probably they've gotten away with this before. And so what I would say, if any law enforcement people are listening out there in Oregon or elsewhere, if you have any stories about people, and any strange stories about houses being ripped off, being broken into in areas that were forest fires, were threatening or something, you need to look at these two people who just got caught in LA. I just cannot believe that they saw what was going down in LA and said, you know what, we need to go buy a fire truck in an auction. Remember, those fires just happened just a couple weeks ago. And it's just hard for me to imagine that these people scrounged up some money. Maybe they stole the truck or something. Maybe that's what it is. Even so, I'm guessing that they've done this before and have had this truck for a while. I guess they'll find out. My guess is what's already happened is that authorities have gone back to Oregon, to wherever these people were living, and gone inside their house to see if they could find any stolen goods, and that might lead authorities in a proper direction to see if they've ripped other people off the same way, pretending to be firefighters, going into in areas that were harmed by forest fires and people evacuated. They go in with their fire truck. Looks like, they look like legitimate firefighters. It's a legitimate truck. They go in there, break into these places, steal the stuff, throw the stuff in the truck, and nobody's the wiser. What got them in trouble in LA is that, in LA, you're not messing around with a bunch of country bumpkins. You're not messing around. You don't have to worry about, it might be easier to fool maybe some local volunteer firefighters or something like that. Whereas in LA, where all the firefighters are professionals and everybody knows each other and they're on the beat all the time because fires are happening all the time, those types of people are going to probably notice something that doesn't seem right more than they might in some other location. Of course, who's going to ever think that anybody's doing something like this? But obviously something, my perception in reading the story is that the authorities down there noticed this fairly quickly. This is not something these people were cruising around for days and finally got noticed. It sounds to me like they got noticed fairly quickly. So, they're just like, something doesn't seem right here. And it wouldn't have been necessarily what it said on the fire truck, because a lot of fire departments from outside of California have gone in there to help. So it would not necessarily have been unusual to see a fire department or fire department truck from Oregon down there in Southern California trying to help out. So it must have been something else. Must have been. Donna says, "Hey, Ed, good to see you." Donna, good to see you in the chat. Let's see tonight. Thank you for making time on this very rare Tuesday show. And Amy says, "You can't fool the city slickers." I guess not. Probably what didn't help these people was that there were already all the stories about thieves going in and ripping off houses. So it very well could have been that the fire department, and of course they have the Army Reserve down there as well, and LAPD, they were all kind of on alert to be looking for people like that. Maybe not looking for a fake fire truck, but looking for people who might have been, just looked a little out of place, no matter what they were driving or what they were wearing. Deborah, hey, so you don't have to apologize, Deborah. That's totally fine. We're on a different night this week. No need to apologize. So that's the fake firefighter story. And of course, as it says here, these people are career criminals anyway. So they're always scheming. But what's unclear to me is, did they end up actually stealing anything? Did they stop them before they actually got into any houses? It didn't say so in the article. Yeah. Now, one more thing I want to say about the LA fires, and I know that a couple days ago, or maybe yesterday, they had some other more, once again, they had these conditions that could have been ripe for fires again, but it seems to me that the threat of more big fires has decreased, but it's going to take a long time. I mean, to get back to normal. It's gonna be a while, years. But in reading, though, continuing to read, and you should know, when that was going on a couple weeks ago, I was watching it live. Of course, because of my weird sleep hours these days. I was actually watching live LA news as these reporters were on the scene and all. That was just like 2 weeks ago now. Just bad. Now, the question continues to be, though, were these fires started by arson? Was it a firebug who started these fires, the Palisades fire, the other Altadena fire, or was it just natural circumstances due to down power lines or something like that? Once again, as I stated last week, there's still nothing that I've seen to think that it was arson. I'm not saying there wasn't somebody out there lighting a fire, and in fact, they did seemingly catch somebody days after the big fires had already started, and took that person into custody, and you can see the videos up everywhere. But I don't want to get into a situation where I say, well, these fires were arson, and this is exactly what these people meant to do. I refuse to believe that, there's somebody out there that's going to start a fire saying, you know what, I'm going to start this fire right now, and it's going to completely destroy all of Pacific Palisades. Nobody could have predicted that. I mean, it happened. It certainly happened. But that's just a little too extravagant for me. And instead, I'm inclined more to believe that these fires were started by, they're not taking care of their infrastructure in California. They have a lot of power lines that are near limbs, and the wind kicks up and the limbs hit the power line, and the power line gets knocked down and it hits the ground and it sparks and everything's so dry. That's how most fires get started in California. That's how. And the reason this continues to happen is they're just not taking care of, their infrastructure. Deborah said, I say a cigarette could certainly do it, Deborah. Certainly could. But, they've been able to kind of narrow down, although they don't necessarily have 100% assuredness of what started. These seem to have started in fairly remote areas. I'm not saying there couldn't have been somebody out there who started something. Now, I did say on the other hand, that they think one of the fires could have been started from fireworks that went off on New Year's, like several days before these fires started, where fireworks had gone off. The fire department showed up, thought they put it out, but something still could have been smoldering, and then days later, it erupted again. Once again, that's not arson. That's an accident. But I'm just still not buying into any idea that there are firebugs out there and they're looking to burn down all of LA. I just don't see that at all. 0, 0, 0, 0. So we have these fake firefighters. What a story. What a story. Let's move on to this. You remember last week I talked about this guy, a pilot from Las Vegas who disappeared, just took off. Was it from the North Las Vegas airport and flew up into the mountains, never to be seen again. And seemingly, while he was doing this, he shut his transponder off, and radar lost contact with him. And as I stated when I talked about this story, that's a bad sign. Now, this guy had a reputation of going up. He was a licensed pilot. He liked to go up, kind of clear his head. And that's what, go up and fly around Mount Charleston, whatever they said in the article from last Monday, the last live show. And then he'd come home. But that is not what happened this time. Well, you should know that the plane has been found. It's been found in a very remote area. And yes, this is a plane crash. And what they've said, and I'll just read the article. Officials said they were working diligently to access the remote location where a missing pilot's plane was found over the weekend, so this past weekend, but would not be able to reach it Monday. Michael Martin, 65 years old, took off from the North Las Vegas airport on the morning of January 2nd and disappeared. His family reported him missing on January 5th. His plane was found Sunday near Mount Jefferson in Nye County, and Sheriff Joe McGill said it would be weeks before it would be possible to recover a body. The Las Vegas Metro Police Department helicopter they need to use is undergoing maintenance, and so is a Washoe County helicopter, he said. Officials also asked federal agencies, the FAA and the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, for helicopters, but the agency said they couldn't provide them, according to McGill. We've exhausted all possibilities of how we're going to get to the site, he said. Nye County Director of Emergency Management, Scott Lewis, said it is not clear if Martin's body is in the plane, but the aircraft looks like it suffered significant damage. McGill said that while it has not been possible to see what's inside the plane, he believes Martin's body is in it. There was too much wind to access the location of the plane Monday, according to Lewis, so yesterday. And it has to be absolutely safe. Has to be absolutely safe for the people we're putting into that area, he said. The FAA spokesperson said the FAA and the NTSB will investigate. NTSB will be in charge of the investigation. In a post on social media site X that did not name Martin, the NTSB said it was investigating the January 2nd crash of a Piper PA 32300 near Round Mountain, an unincorporated community in Nye County, about 8 miles southwest of Mount Jefferson. Martin's family said his plane was a Piper from the 1960s, so it's definitely his plane. The preliminary information we have is the plane impacted remote mountainous terrain under unknown circumstances. According to the agency, investigators will examine records, including flight tracking data, air traffic control communications, and weather conditions, then issue a preliminary report within 30 days. So what's everybody saying here? Amy says, we have a lot of problems in California, so I've noticed, Amy. Deborah says that makes sense regarding the fireworks. Hello, Maureen. How are you? Deborah says, I'm a cigarette smoker, but I see a lot of people flipping them out their car windows. Ticks me off, just plain careless behavior. Yeah, people do that, Deborah. Of course, you don't have to worry about doing that here in Florida because everything's so humid and wet all the time anyway. But in California and other places, certainly different situation. So getting back to this Michael Martin guy who seemingly has crashed his plane. Now, you should know some things if you don't know. Your average everyday propeller plane does not have a black box. It does not have a cockpit voice recorder. I don't know how many of you are really into plane crashes or anything, but I think everybody at this point understands that the jets we fly in from Southwest, Alaska Airlines, American, they all have two different recording systems. And one that is recording all the parameters of the plane, the power that the engines are putting out. What's the rudder doing? What are the flaps doing? Is the gear down? All these, the speed and altitude. We have that one black box. Of course, they're not black; they're orange. But then you have the other black box that does nothing but records the conversations in the cockpit between the pilots, co-pilot, and of course with air traffic control. All of that stuff gets recorded as well. But you need to understand in your everyday little propeller plane that you can see flying above you wherever you live at like 3,000, 4,000 feet, there's no requirements that those types of planes have anything like that. So for this plane, gotta believe there's no recording in it that's going to show what the plane was doing at the time. In addition, there's going to be no cockpit voice recorder to catch anything this guy might have said while he was flying that plane. So they're going to have to figure out what happened without all of that. Now, it seems to me at this point, this is fairly straightforward. Now, it very well could have been an accident, and people with these propeller planes are flying into mountains all the time, and a lot of those are accidents. Very common type of accident. People get up there, maybe there are clouds, maybe they get caught in a tight spot and they can't turn around, and they run out of room and they crash. Very common. I don't know if that's what happened here. Of course, if they go up there, they find the plane. He's in the plane. Of course, he's deceased. My guess is that the eventual decision will be is that this guy did this on purpose. It very well may be in looking at the plane, even though it is crashed, they might find something mechanically wrong with it. Maybe the engine cut out, maybe a wing fell off, I don't know, or something. Unlikely. Very, very unlikely. So, but given, of course, being that we know that he seemingly shut off his transponder, that, as I stated last week, that's a bad sign. It does seem to point to some sort of plan to hurt himself. Why? I don't know. I don't know what was going on in his life. I don't know. Maybe he'd just been diagnosed with cancer and terminal cancer or something. I don't know. But as I've stated before, kind of when we've covered, and maybe I even said this last week when this story was first covered on the live show, I'm really starting to realize more and more that a lot of these crashes like this probably are suicides. I'm not saying they eventually get labeled as suicides, because that, you have to remember something, that if a pilot is having suicidal thoughts, all right, if they don't want anybody to know that they committed suicide, there are ways to do that as a pilot. There are ways to do that. And it could be flying up some box canyon where you can't turn around. And so when the plane finally does run into the side of the mountain because there's not enough room to turn and go back the other direction, I don't know how many investigators are going to come to the conclusion that this person did this on purpose. Probably an investigator is going to say, this person this pilot got himself into a situation by mistake. Whereas it very well could be that the pilot got himself into this situation on purpose. And there would really be no way to tell the difference. You have to keep that in mind. Also, another way a pilot could do that is to fly into clouds when they're not instrument rated, and then put the plane into a spin, goes down, hits the ground, and probably in an investigation situation, probably investigators going to say, well, the person lost control of the plane because he lost sight of the ground. He had spatial disorientation. He got lost in the clouds, didn't know what he was doing, and lost control of the plane and crashed, even though it very well could be that the pilot did that on purpose. So I want you to understand this. I know it's kind of morbid, but being that I know a lot about this stuff because I take an interest in it, anytime you see in the news about some pilot who was up by himself and ran into a mountain or something like this, even though it may eventually, the investigation may say, I think it was an accident, we have to be very open to the idea that at least some of these are suicides. And of course, the reason pilots do this, they don't want anybody to know that they committed suicide. So they make it look like an accident. It happens. I have to believe that it happens. In this situation, without knowing of course, I realized that it ran into a mountain, but it could have been an accident. Being that he shut off that transponder is a bad sign. That's probably not. But without seeing the actual crash site, it's hard to say. But I think probably this was being one where they determined probably this was on purpose, I'm thinking. So this gives you a little background on plane crashes. One more story I have of information to pass along to all of you, and why people do this. People take their own lives for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons don't make any sense, and then some of the reasons do make sense. It's all very sad, but I think we also understand that there's people who are being diagnosed with terminal illnesses all the time, and this just is an example. And do I really want to put my family through this? And, if I, want to fight this out, I'm going to go through all my savings, and then there's not going to be anything left for my heirs. And, what's my dead wife going to live on? Or, what? And these are some of the reasons that people end up taking their lives. And sometimes they do it in ways to cover that up. And even when we just look at the disappearances that we've featured on Unfound, I am inclined to believe that at least some of those disappearances are suicides that are disappearances. We don't necessarily, there's no physical evidence to think that they're suicides. We might suspect it, but these people walked off because they wanted to commit suicide and they just haven't been found. So just have to keep that in mind. Moving on, I got an email from a listener about the disappearance of Sherry Mayhan. This is the disappearance that happened in Western Pennsylvania in 1985. February, we're coming up on 40 years since Sherry went missing. This is close to me, I guess, emotionally, but this brings me back to my childhood. She went missing about a half hour, maybe not even that, from where I grew up in Pennsylvania. I remember it like it was yesterday. I would have been 14 at the time. I would have been in, what grade would I have been in? 7th grade? No, 85. I would have been in 8th grade. And she went missing in February of 1985. And if you remember, she got off a bus and never made it to her house. And you also remember there's a video. I actually went there some years ago. Must have been 2017, summer of 2017. And I went there and did a little filming. Well, somebody emailed me about this. And, asking me, some things need to be done. Look at all this information. This seems to point in a particular direction. And I have to admit that I wasn't really... I appreciate people taking an interest in these disappearances. I want you all to take interest in disappearances. Whether it's, something that emotionally you connect to, or a disappearance that happened near where you live, or even maybe you just happen to know the family or something. I hope all of you will somehow get involved with some disappearance out there, some family out there, in whatever capacity. The issue I had with the person who emailed me is that the person was acting like what I think it's a guy. What he was sending me was new information. And, there was an article, if you don't know Sherry Mayhan, the big thing, maybe, if this isn't ringing a bell, the big thing about Sherry Mayhan's disappearance was that there was allegedly this van that was seen near the school bus that had a skier picture on the side. And that van has never been located. the last 40 years. And you would think, sounds like a fairly rare type of vehicle, that somebody would have seen it somewhere. Well, wouldn't you know, there was some woman in the Pittsburgh area who had a van with some kind of, it's one of these, conversion vans, like from the 70s that were very fashionable, like that. And I have to admit, as a kid, I always found those vans fascinating. But she had a van that was kind of like that, and the local newspaper tracked her down, and she was interviewed and everything else. And the person who contacted me was saying, well, on that day, she's saying that this guy drove her van to work, and, that guy needs to be investigated. How do we know he isn't the one who drove her van out there and kidnapped Sherry Mayhan? I guess on the surface, it sounds pretty good. But then once you start looking into it, you find out that, this guy works at a steel plant, and there were like 100 people, who saw the van at the job, who saw him and everything. And I had to write back to this person and say, I'm not trying to be critical. I'm not trying to be negative. But it seems like, what you're trying to say here, that this guy who was driving her van that day went out there. First of all, this woman and he did not live anywhere near where Sherry Mayhan was taken, where she disappeared from. Didn't live anywhere near there. In addition, the description that was given of the van and the van that this woman drove, they're not as close. You'd have to see the sketch of the van and then see a picture of her van. They're not even similar to each other. They're both vans. They're both these, these conversion vans, that might have like, a couch or a bed in the back seat. And both of them had murals on the side. And yes, both of them, the themes of these murals or these paintings, of course, they didn't do wraps back then. This was actual paint, were of snow and everything. But they're not similar at all. There's no way that her van could have been seen realistically. And then somebody came up with the idea of the sketch that was eventually made. And so I just had to tell this person, like I said, I'm not trying to be negative, but, you're all hot on this, but it seems like all of this has already been investigated. It seems like, it's been 40 years. It seemed like the police did went and talked to this guy. It seems they did go to where he worked. It seems they did have all these people who saw him on that day. And on top of everything else, they interview this woman for this article because she has this van that, in the most general of descriptions, looks like the van that was out there in Cabot where Sherry went missing. And even she doesn't think it's her van. She admits, this guy in my life was driving it that day. But even at the time back in 1985 or 86 or whenever she was interviewed about this, she didn't even think it was her van. And, she admitted that people, when they would see it, would kind of ask her, hey, about that Sherry Mayhan who went missing, and there was the van, and, your van kind of has this snow theme on it and everything else. And the woman was like, yeah, it's not my van. So what are we talking about? So, I guess where I'm going with this is that I appreciate people wanting to be interested in disappearances. But let's not become so, ignorant of the work that has been done to the point that you get involved. Certainly police make mistakes. I mean, we've talked about it. We know they don't take them seriously, on and on and on and on and on. But the information that was presented to me by this person who emailed me, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. It seems like this has all been done. And it doesn't seem like anybody has any doubts about all of this. There's no, you know me, I've talked about wiggle room before when it comes to investigations and what people think about disappearances and our perceptions of them. When we started getting into theories, is there any wiggle room in that theory to think maybe something else happened? Or is there any wiggle room in what somebody has said to think that the person's lying, or wiggle room to think that this, what, does the timeline work out? Is there any wiggle room? And the information that was presented to me by this person who emailed me, there's just no wiggle room. Now, it very well all may be wrong, but there's no wiggle room at this point, because it seems clear to me that they looked into this and just nothing came of it. So, and I will admit, back in the day, well before I started Unfound, I was on the thread on websites once again, years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something. And I probably made some comments in there. You might even be able to find them on the thread for Sherry Mayhan. But once in a while, this story would pop up about this woman who had a van, and my neighbor had a van who looked like that and everything, like the van that was out there. And I doubt all of it. It's amazing how people will get on there and say, well, my neighbor had a van that was very similar. Where's the pictures? Why didn't you do something? Here's what I think I know. Given that I grew up there, I was there. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I remember this being big news and her going missing and everything. I can be pretty, even though I have complaints now that I'm a professional and missing persons expert, I have a lot of complaints about police. Here's what I think I know. They did everything they could to try to track down this van. They could never find it. So all these people saying, oh yeah, my next door neighbor had a van exactly like that. It's all BS. And what I eventually ended up telling this person who contacted me is that I think you have to be open to the idea that this van doesn't exist. And I know that's a very provocative statement, especially for any of you who know about Sherry's. Once again, it's on Amos. You can look it up. Mahan, Sherry Mayhan, who went missing from Cabot, Cobot, Pennsylvania in 1985. You can look it up. It's on Amos. It's on the Charlie Project. A lot of stories and things have been done. Still have not covered, of course, the disappearance for Unfound. Maybe we'll get to it this year. I don't know. But as much as they tried to find that van all over the place, nothing. And I can understand, the reason they can't find the van is because the person got rid of the van right after the kid, this abduction happened. The person's driving this van, takes Sherry, somehow abducts her, drives off. Abductor eventually, the perpetrator eventually figures out, oh, my vehicle was seen, so I have to get rid of it. Makes all the sense in the world. The problem is we can't forget about everything that happened before the disappearance happened. This person still would have been driving that van all around and had it parked somewhere and going to work, parked out in front of the house, taking it to the restaurant, taking to get it washed, taking it to the grocery store and everything, and still nothing. So I can understand the van not being seen after Sherry went missing. The problem I have is, why wasn't the van seen before, like the days before, the weeks before, months before, years before she went missing? Being that nobody's been able to offer up any solid information on that, I have to start thinking maybe the van doesn't exist. And this was just a figment of somebody's imagination. Like, we know this is a real thing. People make stuff up. People make cars up. People make people up. People make planes up. They make motorcycles up. They make all sorts of stories up. People lie. And how can I specifically say how this lie would have gotten started? No, I can't. But I am open to the idea. Maybe the person who started this story regarding this van is the actual person who took Sherry, and maybe they created that story to throw everybody off. How about that? How about that? So I just, I just don't know. This, brought back a lot of things to me, given that I'm from the area. And I remember when this happened. And I really don't know when it did happen back in 1985 that anybody really believed that it would go on for 40, this would be unsolved for 40 years. Should also know that her family has always been good suspects. Her parents were divorced. Her mother was living with another guy, and that's where Sherry was going that day. There was eventually a lot of back and forth between Sherry's father and the mother about, what exactly happened. Of course, the mother, suspicious of the biological father. Could he have had somebody kidnap Sherry or something? Hey, we know custody battles can get, pretty nasty. A lot of lying goes on and everything. I just have to, this is one of those ones. I don't know anything about this disappearance than any more you do. I don't have. Yeah, the chat's working, Maureen. Yeah, I see. I agree with you. I see you, Maureen. I agree with you, Ed. I see you. Just not a lot of people are talking tonight. People like to just sit back and listen, and that's fine too, Maureen. But I see. Yeah, the chat's working, Maureen. I see you. This is a disappearance. I have to admit that I don't have a good feeling for it. I would say off the top of my head that I have to believe that it's family involved. That that was somebody who knew Sherry and took her for whatever reason. We all know the odds of strangers, stranger on stranger crime, very low. Especially when you start talking about where this happened, out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania and on some back road. This wasn't a little girl getting kidnapped from a street, in New York City. So I'm inclined to believe it was done by somebody who knew Sherry. But given that this is still unsolved 40 years later, and, and that circle of people could not have been that wide, but it's still unsolved, it does start to make you question whether that is the best answer or not. It seems like it is, but maybe not. We also have to add in that this disappearance, at least in Western Pennsylvania terms, was rare. There weren't any other disappearances like hers. It's not like there was a serial kidnapper working Western Pennsylvania, or that's in Butler County, which is coincidentally where my dad lives now. But it doesn't seem like there was a serial kidnapper working that area or whatever. So once again, what are we talking about? If it was a crime of opportunity, would somebody have really done this crime of opportunity? Even, other kids got off at that same bus stop. Now, granted, they walked the opposite direction, but could somebody have predicted that who was going to kidnap Sherry? Maybe if the person had been following the van for a few days and knew how everything, kind of, what the pattern was, I guess. No proof of that. So this is why it continues to be a stumper all these years later. I guess what also makes this very difficult is that Sherry was old enough to understand, to know her name and to know her life. And what I mean by that is, she would have been abducted at 2 years old. then she could have been raised by a totally different family, be given a different name, and she would not have known the difference unless there, it was something like a racial thing or something. She's white and her parents are Hispanic or black or something, and then you start thinking, well, what's going on here? But she was old enough to know her name, and so it wouldn't have been possible for somebody to kidnap her and change her name to Jane Doe and raise her, and you'd think that would not work out. You'd think that eventually Sherry would say, what's going on here? I want to go back to my parents or something. I guess what I'm saying is I don't believe that Sherry Mayhan is walking around out there today and with the new ID that, identity that she was given in 1985. That did not happen. I don't know what happened, but I'm guessing that didn't happen. So Sherry Mayhan, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with their disappearance. Like I said, I really don't know if I would even, talk about her disappearance that much if it hadn't been for it happening very close to where I grew up in Pennsylvania. So there's that. Let me move on to what we got. About 9 minutes left. Let me see one more. Let's talk about this pizza delivery driver who went missing. The search for a Domino's pizza delivery driver who disappeared in Minnesota during a shift last week remains ongoing after authorities say his car was discovered 100 miles away in Wisconsin. Witness told police that they saw Shufab Zhang, 42 years old, in his red Toyota Camry around 4 p.m. Saturday in Superior, Wisconsin. Police discovered Zhang's Toyota Camry unoccupied on Sunday in Superior, around 170 miles north of Apple Valley, where Zhang was reported missing on January 14th after he did not return home from work at Domino's. A friend of Zhang's also reported that they spoke in Roseville, Minnesota around 8 p.m. Saturday. The police say it was unclear that how Zhang traveled or if he used a different car to cross back into the state. Investigators believe Zhang may be experiencing a mental health crisis after his uncharacteristic behavior. Police said that while there's no indication that Zhang is a threat to others, he is known to carry a firearm and has a permit to carry. Zhang was first reported missing after he failed to make 4 deliveries that were scheduled around 6 p.m. on January 14th. Officers conducted searches in each area where Zhang was supposed to make a delivery. The police said they did not find the missing delivery driver. Police said the last known sighting of Zhang was on January 14th, was at a Target in Richfield, Minnesota, though he's also believed to have been in Golden Valley at one point. Investigation into his phone location, bank records, and known social media accounts have not produced any leads on why Zhang disappeared or his current whereabouts. Friends and family describe Zhang in a post on GoFundMe page as the most thoughtful, kind, and selfless person we know, and the one who always puts others before himself. Our family's heartbroken by his disappearance, and each moment without him feels like an eternity. We're doing everything in our power to bring him home safely. Zhang is described as an Asian male, 5'8", weighing 215 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. So what to think on this? Pizza delivery can be dangerous. There are situations where, of course, these days, a lot of people order pizzas over online. I've done it myself. It's not called in, it's emailed in. And those can be faked, just like calls can be faked. And, an order comes in. Zhang is required to deliver the pizza or pizzas to a particular address. And he gets there and the address doesn't exist, but there's somebody waiting for him and something of a violent nature occurred. Not common, but it happens enough for us all to know that it does happen. And, a lot of times this does not end up in any murders or death or anything usually ends up being that the police pizza delivery driver just gets ripped off. Loses the phone, loses the wallet, loses the money, loses, I guess, the pizza too. And the car gets taken, and the pizza delivery driver has to go to the nearest house, and and they call 911 or anything. This is how things usually go. And then you get those rare occasions where pizza delivery drivers are murdered, or they do go missing. Now, of course, what catches our eye in this story is that they do say, is it possible? Where they put it? Investigators believe Zhang may be experiencing a mental health crisis after his uncharacteristic behavior. Now, my insight tells me investigators would only say that if somebody who knew Zhang said something to them. That, you know what, he was acting a little weird that day. You know what, he did say that he was having some suicidal thoughts. I talked to him, and I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. He seemed to be losing his mind. He was hallucinating or something. Given that investigators say that he might have had a mental health crisis, I think we have to believe that that's exactly what happened here. Why, I don't know. We'd have to know a lot more about Zhang to be able to tell that. So maybe this is something that he had been experiencing for a long time. Maybe it's something happened in his life not long ago that was still affecting him. A lot of different possibilities. I don't know. But I think for us, when we read stories like this, and it is brought up about mental health, we have to take that very seriously. I do not think that it would be included in this article if the investigators thought that there was some foul play here, that he got lured somewhere. I don't think that would be in this article. Now, what does this mean? I'm hoping one of these, what came to my mind was a video that I posted a while ago. And in fact, I think it's still linked in the discussion group on Facebook, was from that active self-protection channel that I go to. And if you remember, do you remember the young man who the cop pulled up on him, and this young man seemingly had been in a car wreck? Remember that? And cop gets out. The two are having a fine conversation, and the kid's, seemingly acting okay. Just seems a little frazzled, being that he was just in a car wreck and everything. And then all of a sudden he loses his mind and goes for the cop's gun. Remember that? Remember, I call it the I'm fine video. The kid said, "I'm fine," right before he went for the cop's gun. Now, you know what happens when you go for a police officer's gun? You're going to get shot. And that's what happened. Is this kind of what was going on with Zhang? That he's having some sort of mental health crisis, but he's telling people that he's okay. And this is something that we have to understand, that the way we think about people going through mental health crises and how they look and how they act and everything isn't necessarily, that's just a stereotype. That may just be a cliche. It doesn't mean it's true. And in fact, I think the more we have these videos online, like the one I just described, we find that people who are going through mental health crises and have all these thoughts going on in their heads about violence and everything else, it's amazing how calm, maybe a little frazzled, but nothing unusual. It's amazing how non-unusual they can appear on the outside, but on the other hand, on the inside, they're right on the edge of, crashing their car or going after a cop's gun, anything like that. And so this is all what comes to my mind when I think about Zhang, and we think about people driving places. What was going, his car was found, how many miles away? Well, what was going through his mind through this whole time? Did he even realize what he was doing? Was he so out of it that he didn't realize? I don't know. A lot of different, the human mind, as I've found out over the past month and a half dealing with what I've been dealing with sleep issues and everything else, and I have a fairly mild version of insomnia compared to a lot of people. I can't imagine these other people, but it can make you feel wacky sometimes. So it's just something. So when I see these stories, it's kind of what comes, what's going through people's heads. Sometimes it's hard to say. All right, let's move to it's 11 o'clock, so let's all get out of here. But I unfortunately didn't get to this story about this guy who went missing and then his house burned down 2 years later. Maybe I'll get to that next week or something, or at least I'll post a link to or something. This Friday, we're going to go over the disappearance of Kelly Rothwell. She was involved in law enforcement, and she went missing right down the street from where I live now, right down there in Indian Rocks Beach. She went missing on March 2nd, 12th of 2011, so approximately 6 months before I moved here. And for all intents and purposes, most likely her boyfriend, David Perry, killed her. David Perry, one of the worst people we've ever talked about on Unfound. And when you listen to the episode on Friday, you will be reminded of that. As I stated earlier in the show, I hope to get down there tomorrow or Thursday and do a little video outside of where that all happened. And then I'll also go to the spot where Kelly's vehicle was eventually found. I don't think I've ever done that before. I'm going to have to check on that. But I'm going to do that. So be looking for that as a companion piece to the original episode that came out way back in 2016. Damien asked, have you ever covered the Elizabeth Campbell disappearance from Texas? I have not, Damon. No, have not. Name sounds familiar, but that's about it. But that's all I got for you tonight. Man, the 2 hours went fast. I actually feel quite awake at this point, even though I'm supposed to be going to bed in 2 hours and 15 minutes. So all of you, I hope, have a great rest of your week. Please give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the page, to this channel. And you will hear the replaying of the Kelly Rothwell episode from 2016 on Friday. And hopefully I'll be uploading some other things, at least to the YouTube channel. What I didn't say is I'm going to try to redo one of these things I'm trying to do is start a new website with new design and everything else. That's also in the plans as well. Talk to somebody about that today, so maybe we can make that happen. That's all I got. Keep your heads on swivels out there. Stay warm. It's -11 at my dad's place tonight. Crazy. It's even cold here. Keep your heads on swivels. Be safe out there. That's all I got. Good night.